and gentlemen. First of all, apologies that you're all packed in like this. I assure you, once we get to the plumbing application, we'll bring you in separately, because you can see the size of the chamber only caters for about 40 people, so I do apologise. One of the reasons I brought you all in, there is some confidential business which the council has to deal with this evening, and that's known as a part 2 business. So I will go through part of the agenda first. When we've dealt with that, and the council will deal with part 2, unfortunately I'll have to ask you all to leave, because it is confidential business. Once we've dealt with that, and we'll do it as quickly as possible, then I'll invite you all back in groups, and we'll deal as quick as we can with your application. So please accept our apologies for the cramped conditions. Okay, so council will open the meeting with a welcome from myself. I'm Councillor Tony McCarthy, and I shall be chairing the meeting. Around the table with me are ward councillors, senior officers from the council's planning department, a senior officer from highways, a senior officer from the council's environmental and health department, a senior officer from the legal department, and we're also joined by one of our senior directors, Mr. Andy Brown. So I'll begin by asking everybody to introduce themselves to you. Councillor Bow, will you begin, please?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Bob Barr, and I represent Lynn.
Good evening, I'm Celia Jordan, Councillor for Stockton Heath.
Les Morgan, Councillor for Latchford West.
Andy Heaver, Councillor for Great Sankey North.
Good evening, everyone. Faisal Rashid, Whittle Hall.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Lawrence Murphy. Councillor Jeff Richards.
Jenny Cardwell, Democratic Services.
My name is Paul Clisby, and I'm a solicitor at the council and here to advise or give legal advice.
My name is Daniel Hartley, I'm the Development Manager.
Andrew McBone, Senior Planning Officer.
Christine Carruthers, Senior Planning Officer.
Declan Cleary, Senior Planning Officer.
Andy Farrell, Executive Director.
Andrew Burrows, Highways.
Joanne Mullally, Environmental Protection.
Thank you, colleagues. I understand that one of our female colleagues explained to you about the housekeeping in the event of fire and where the facilities are, yes? Okay, councillor, shall we now we'll take item 6 on your main planning agenda, which is the Beaumont Community High School for demolition of the existing school for construction and replacement of a 2-storey school building. We'll be mindful, council, we did site visit this some short while ago. We've got 3 speakers. We have Mr. James Dickinson, who wishes to speak against the application. Would you like to come first, please?
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, we've had some additional comments from our Families and Wellbeing Department. They feel that this is a strategic priority for the council and will contribute to driving up educational performance in the local community. We've specifically asked members to take into account government policy statement planning for schools. And that policy states that the government believes that the planning system should operate in a positive manner when dealing with proposals for the creation, expansion and alteration of schools, and there should be a presumption in favour of development of schools as expressed in the National Planning Policy Framework. That's some additional comments from consultees, and very briefly, our Trees and Woodlands Officer has considered the revised landscaping scheme, which now includes 6.5 metre high hornbeam trees and 1.5 metre high holly trees on the perimeter of the site, and that's when planted, so the heavy standing trees. It's raising no objection to that revised landscaping scheme. But no objection from the council's flood risk team, no objection from United Utilities, and no objection from our Highways Department, subject to the conditions as listed in the report. As per the update report, there are some additional conditions recommended, and they relate principally to surface water regulation scheme. In addition to that, members, if you are minded to approve this application, I request an amended condition number 10, and that principally would then relate to the revised landscaping scheme that we received late in the last couple of days. So subject to those amended conditions, Chair, officers are recommending approval of this application.
Thank you, Mr. Hart, for that update. Mr. Dixon, when you're ready, please.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tim Stevens, I live at 46 Long Lane. I spoke against this, the original proposal in the August planning meeting. I'm speaking against the revised plan tonight. Even in the original report, they conceded the proposal wasn't ideal, and yet they've resubmitted almost an identical plan. This proposal is as unacceptable as before. They've moved the building a mere 1.5 metres, 5 feet away from the original site. That's less than the distance between these two tables in front of me. The local council, Mike Hannon, will tell you that's a considerable distance. That's not a considerable distance to me. The building itself is 7.5 metres high and 34 metres wide on the northern end. Also to bear in mind that the building would be raised above the 100-year flood level, making it even more imposing. As I said before, 7.5 metres is the ridge height of a domestic or residential house with a pitched roof. This is a flat, dark, vertical grey wall. Another issue I have with the building being so close is that they have positioned the music rooms and engineering workshop at the northern end. This will create a noise nuisance for the residents' boundary. Even with moving the building, it still creates a shadow at the end of the gardens on the northern boundary, as illustrated in the swamp map analysis. Also, the environmental media studies have included a picture that claims to be the view from 46 Long Lane. This is not my garden, and I ask the councillors not to be swayed by this doctored image. You'll always see the principal was a large picture as well. I don't know what he's trying to demonstrate with that. The north-eastern corner of the school of the site is lower and undeveloped, and I believe this provides drainage for surface water. I have grave concerns about the building, service road and paths, as they will be raised above the level of my garden, as indicated in drawings in the design and access statement. All this compacted ground will then drain down towards the gardens on the north-eastern boundary. WM Consortium stated in their report that the ground is not suitable for soakaways, but to use permanent paths. Once it's permeated through the paving, where will it go then? The ground will be compacted. I'm not overly sure whether the proposers hold the councils in contempt or the planning meeting in contempt, or whether they're just using the drinking tap method of getting their proposal through. But I imagine £10.7 million will make anybody arrogant.
Good evening, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Chairman, members. I'm here to support the officer's recommendation for approval for this particular scheme. For those of you who know the area of Long Lane Corridor has got a very well established use of schools within that area, primary schools, and there's been a history of senior schools for as long as I can remember. The current location of the academy school was the former Orford School that became Montfort School that amalgamated with being secondary technical and Oakwood secondary technical, and they're all moved to this present location. The footprint of that is, I believe, one of very well established use on that site, and I did question why he was refusing in the first place, but in saying that it has been amended to take on board some of the comments in the area. Part of our next point, Chairman, is down to finance, and I know that's not a material consideration in terms of planning, but I think it's a very relevant point because many of you will know I was very much behind what went on Orford Jubilee Park, and the only sad part about that, William Beeman didn't receive a school from Building Schools of the Future. That money got withdrawn at the time, which is a sad reflection on that particular site. But they have been successful in education funding, through the Education Funding Agency, for this particular location. If we were successful tonight, that funding would be lost. And I make the point because there's been a national story all this week with declining standards of teaching in our schools. Now, that is a valid point in terms of teaching, but the working environment and the teaching environment are equally as important to keep the standards up. And I'm of the opinion that if this was refused, I was a governor on the school for close on 30 years, and the regular report was the the condition, the deteriorating condition of the school, and I believe we would have a school not fit for purpose if this was a decline because the money would be lost. I hope members will take on board all the points that have been made. The officers, I believe, have made all the relevant conditions to make this workable. I do believe it has got a very well established use, and I would hope that members would support this application this evening by approving this application.
Thank you, Councillor. Ms. Harvey, please. Good evening.
Good evening, Chair and members. I'm Carl Harvey, I work for Waits Construction. You will recall that a previous application was refused in August. Since then, Waits have carefully considered your comments and the reason for the refusal. One thing that remains unchanged is the urgent need for the replacement school. This is made clear by Hilary Smith, as reported by the officers earlier, by Councillor Hannon, by the Education Funding Agency in awarding funding for the project, by the school itself and its pupils and parents we have spoken to. There is also unanimous recognition by the Planning Committee in August that a new school was needed. Waits remain committed to the project and has re-evaluated all options with the EFA and the project architects. We explained at the previous committee that although the site is large, there are a significant number of constraints which limit the area which can be developed. Where design solutions exist, these significantly increase the cost of the building works in other parts of the site. The constraints include, but are not limited to, flooding issues across the sports pitches to the south of the site, a presumption against developments on sports pitches to the south of the site in accordance with national planning policy, high costs associated with the relocating of services and utilities in the northwest of the site, and the need to keep the existing school operational until the new school building is complete. To be clear, the EFA cannot provide additional funding, as all projects it delivers through the Priority Schools Building Programme must meet strict affordability criteria. These constraints mean, therefore, that the only realistic option is to locate the replacement school in the northeastern corner of the site. Information submitted as part of the application documents this process, and it is summarised in the site constraints plan in the committee report. We have, however, been able to amend the design and layout of the development to improve the physical relationship. The building has been moved as far south as possible to increase the distance between the school and the properties in Long Lane, and improved landscape screening, including extra heavy standard trees, will be provided to the north and east boundaries. Waits will liaise with the adjacent residents to finalise the landscape scheme if required. The effect of these changes is to ensure that no unacceptable impact on the residential amenity of the adjacent properties will result, and it will certainly not be an overbearing and oppressive development as alleged in the reason for refusal. We have provided photo montages which show the relationship. We trust you agree that this demonstrates an acceptable relationship. In an ideal world where funding for the development was unlimited and not constrained by demonstrating value for money for the taxpayers who are ultimately funding this development, an alternative form of development may have been possible. However, the reality is that a replacement school, if it is going to be provided, as is urgently required, Waits must work within the funding available.
Could you wind up now, please?
A further refusal will put the entire project at risk. The school has already missed out of funding once, and we must take this it's vital we take this opportunity to deliver a high quality modern school which is fit for the purpose it is taken. Thank you.
Councillors? First question? Just Councillor Bell.
I said, could I ask the gentleman from Waits, could you give us a little bit more detail about the exact amelioration changes that you've made since the last application? Because the first speaker suggested it was 1.5 metres move westwards, is that right? And 500 millimetres southwards. Yes, please. Am I right? I'm saying it's 1.5 metres westwards and 0.5 metre southwards.
Yeah, since the last application, the building has only been moved 0.5 metre to the south.
That's all?
Yes.
And no western move at all?
We haven't been able to do that because of the site constraints, which in that case is the existing services.
Oh, services under the ground?
That's correct.
Is that building convenience?
No. There are existing electricity and gas mains which feed the sports hall, which prevent those services would need to be diverted, which puts cost and time constraints on the project, which the current funding levels basically won't stretch to.
What steps have been taken to make the building less overbearing, other than the planting, proposed planting?
In terms of mitigation, we have relocated the bin store away. We have relocated a proposed canopy and hard play areas, which have now gone to the south, so they're no longer near the residential properties. In relation to the music and design and technology classrooms, we have gone for a fixed window set up where it means the windows can't be opened and these rooms will be mechanically ventilated. And we've also introduced obscure glazing on the north and east elevations to those classrooms which may have a possibility of overlooking the garden, so pupils in those classrooms will not be able to see out.
And will there be scope for testing the acoustic properties, and will there be some guarantees as to the acoustic output from that corner?
Absolutely, there is an acoustic report which has been submitted with the plan, and that is subject to further tests and conditions.
So that will be subject to post-build tests?
Yeah, pre-occupation.
Pre-occupation tests. Okay. I mean, that's helpful. I didn't find the letter that was sent to us by the College Authority particularly helpful at all, because it simply reiterated the diagram that had been said last time. The lack of viability of the other side was not clear. You made it more clear tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, Councillor Healy.
Looking at the diagrams here that you did send through, I see lots of big red crosses and lots of red areas, and one solution only given. However, that solution hasn't really changed from last time at all, so from my point of view I see it still as overbearing. What considerations have you made to reduce the size of that plant, the building, given that you've got a massive foyer area there, this is part of it? Has any thought been done to say reducing the area, the footprint of that building, once that's completed, knocking down part of the existing buildings and then building a second building there?
Firstly, since the last committee, we have examined all options. The building is designed by strict design criteria from the Education Funding Agency. It's called the Schedule of Accommodation, where they set out strict minimum areas that are required to make the school function. So yes, although there is an atrium where people go, that is also a breakout space for teaching, an overspill area for lunch. So as part of the design brief, we can't actually make the building footprint any smaller.
But you could add another building.
No.
Why does it have to be contained in one place?
Well, that is the only area that is suitable.
Yeah, but once all these other buildings get knocked down, you're going to have a hell of a lot of space there that's suitable.
In that case, basically, we have to provide a school building that the school can move straight into. The school currently has 900 pupils, so the new building must be able to accommodate those 900 pupils. The demolition is going to be carried out over, and the landscaping works over a period of 6 months. So once you've actually carried that out, and if you were to house a new school, where would the other pupils go? But ultimately, and again, I know this isn't a material consideration, it really is down to that within the budget, that isn't a possible option.
Anybody else who's got a question? This one's anybody else who's got a question? Invite Councillor Barber, okay. Okay, Councillor.
Just questions to the officers. I still feel this is unsatisfactory in relation to the impact it's going to have on residents, albeit a small number of residents. Is there any scope here for some degree of compensation to residents if this application is to go through the present form?
The answer is no. I mean, members need to deal with what's in front of them.
it wouldn't meet the test for a planning obligation. If you're talking about financial compensation, that would not be appropriate in planning terms.
Yes, Mr. Farrell?
To kind of state a couple of points, which may be helpful. And it's been said before, but I would say this, and it's reinforced by the views of our education team. This school is very much in need of replacement, an urgent replacement. In a community that requires this replacement because of the challenges of that community. And I think we owe it to the children and the people of that community as well. There is an opportunity to achieve this. And since your last decision, which I think was the right decision to make at that point, a lot of work has been undertaken by the applicant and your officers in relation to your concerns. Options have been looked at, the constraints of the sites have been explored in detail. Just to help, I'm satisfied that exploration has been intense and deep. And I'm satisfied in planning terms that this is the best location for the school. There's a number of reasons for that. There's a strong need here to keep the existing school fully operational. In liaison with the education team, there's nothing worse than closing the school or trying to relocate a school in temporary facilities, no matter what the cost is, because it disrupts people's education. So that is a critical item here. The new build has to go on while the existing school is operational. Yes, there may be sites at the end of the day when it's demolished, but you have to keep them operational while the build happens. And that's the key constraint on this site. The site is riddled with significant services, which start to yes, affect the viability of the scheme, but affect where you can put the building. And through your decision last time, we've done a lot of work, and so has the applicant, really exploring that in some depth. And we wouldn't be coming to you today recommending this if we hadn't. There are also other flooding issues which again affect where the building could be put. It's one of those sites, and I've been involved in planning for many years, as you know. It's one of the most constrained sites you could come across. You may not perceive it as such. If you try to keep the building operational and the constraints on the site for your flooding and services, it puts the building in their place. There have been some mitigation measures, and that's helped in terms of noise, in terms of impact on residents, and in terms of overlooking. Well, I can reiterate to you members, bearing in mind all the constraints of the sites and the work, the considerable work that's been undertaken since your last decision, I'm strongly recommending this to you.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Councillor?
Yes, I think last time was, as Mr. Farrell said, it was the right time to make that particular decision. There was lots of questions that was not answered, and the impact on local amenity was quite severe. With the mitigations and the items on current application on page 175, I've put my mind more at rest, simply because of my experience of sitting here on this planning committee. I've sat here for 23 years, and I know the gentleman, Mr. Dickinson, was referring to flooding and so on. In all my time, I've never had an application that said it came back to us or been acknowledged, to my knowledge, that flooding has occurred from a building that's been placed there because of the mitigation factors and the engineering solutions that they've come up with. So I would say quite clearly to Mr. Dickinson, I don't feel that flooding is an issue now. With reference to trees, sorry please sir, sit down.
This isn't an open meeting, so please sit down and be quiet.
We're talking about flooding, and there is plenty of flooding.
Please sit down. Thank you very much.
The trees and mitigation and the obscure windows and so on, and moving certain activities within the school I appreciate the level of work that officers have put in on that. And I feel now that the application is more acceptable than the first time it came around. And clearly at that time, a lot of these questions were not answered. I acknowledge that it is a very difficult site, and it must be, you know, in civil engineering terms, to get round and then move children around. So I would support what you're actually saying within the report this evening, and I know Councillor Barr's observations that he's made. I'm clearly more happier with my mind anyway than what I was last time.
Right, Councillor. Anybody else wish to speak? Yes, Councillor.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a recommendation.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Can I move the application as it's stated within the report?
Yes. Your second, yes, Councillor.
Just prior to the vote, can I just, because it will affect the way that I've been minded to vote, I can understand the advice we've had from Mr. Hartley. We're in a very difficult position. I know that planning is never a zero-sum game. There are always winners and losers. Here, we're doing something for the good of the community, the good of the school, and the good of the pupils, all of which are arguments which I completely accept. It is going to disproportionately affect a very small number of residents. And I think that, even though I'm quite sure what Mr. Hartley has said is technically absolutely correct, that there is nothing we can do tonight, the idea of some further mitigation and compensation to the residents directly affecting, we're only talking about probably 4 houses there, it just strikes me that it flies in the face of natural justice to say, okay, but tough, those 4 people are going to have to suffer. I think that both the school and the authority should talk to the residents if they're minded to accept it tonight about what can be done, particularly if their concerns prove to be right. I probably accept that technically it's unlikely, but I don't think it's good enough to say it's unlikely. If their houses do end up being flooded, if they do end up being affected by noise, if the resulting building is over there and reduces, and I know property values are not normally in consideration, but if it does affect those 4 residents in that way, I think some consideration has to be given to them. I'm very sad that there's no mechanism tonight for us to do that.
Thank you for that, Councillor. I don't really think there's anything you could add from a financial point of view, whether something else could be looked at to mitigate the circumstances. And I think it would be helpful if conversation would take place between the applicant. Yes, please,
just in terms of the landscaping scheme, it is a very good landscaping scheme in terms of what's proposed on the boundaries. Ordinarily, we put a condition on requiring any trees that die to be replaced within 5 years. And normally after that 5-year period, if they die, there's very little else we can do. But on this occasion, the condition we recommended requires the trees to be retained in perpetuity, and if they die, they are always replaced. So in that sense, we have gone a little bit beyond what we would normally do in terms of that enhanced mitigation. I don't know if that helps.
That helps a little bit. I think that reassurances concerning noise from the building and or flooding, I don't think there's anything we can do about the overbearing nature of the building, but at least what will there be overborne by will be trees rather than building. But I think that redress should be available if the other concerns prove to be correct.
Could you say, Chair, I think we would be opening floodgates for other schools around the borough to come forward with similar type scenarios. All schools, near enough, are all in local communities because that's what they're about. So if we start going down the line of compensation, how far do we go? It's not just this application, and I know each application is taken on its own merit, and then how much would you pay in compensation and for what reasons? I find it very, very difficult to accept that analogy, but I do take on board your comment, Councillor Barr, that if it's close to somebody's property,
and it's new build.
And it's new build. However, I don't think we could do that, and I don't think certainly couldn't put it in as a condition that further down the line you may want to look at it. There is systems in place that if things do go adrift, then there is various departments within the council who can look at that. And that's the route that you go down, or it becomes civil.
Councillor Healer, we do have a recommendation on the table, so do you want to?
I still want to put my viewpoints by my
Please go on, yes.
It's just that, again, I actually agree with Councillor Barr in terms of the observations. And when it comes to the government guidelines, should operate in a positive manner when dealing with proposals. Yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. And as previously said, we agree that something needs to be done here. My only concern is that it would be quite easy to run roughshod over the interests of the individuals. And this guideline, as far as I can see, does not say give anybody that right.
Yes, well, I think you've been given the assurances, but I'll return you back to Mr. Hart.
Just briefly, just to help Councillor Barr, but in respect of noise, we've actually got 3 conditions relating to controlling noise, so conditions 17, 18 and 19. So in terms of mitigating noise, we have tried to place some suitable controls in that respect. I think in terms of continued dialogue with residents, I think that's important, and I'm sure that the applicants would do that, but what I would suggest is that we do include an informative in respect of the decision to positively request that that happens. So I've put that to members. And lastly, if members are looking to approve this, I'd ask that you move approval with the additional conditions in the update report. Thank you.
So this particular application,
And then Chair, and move it with the additional condition and the informative on the amended word times throughout.
Councillor Rashid, you're seconding that. So the application has been moved for approval and seconded with the conditions and an informative, so therefore I shall put that to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Anybody against? The application is approved. Thank you.